Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We're looking into a financial crystal ball. Imagine if you could peer into the future of a massive construction or engineering firm and actually predict its long-term resilience. And we're not just looking at what they built yesterday. We want to analyze exactly what they're contracted to build tomorrow. So today, we're going to break down exactly how investors evaluate a firm's true climate risk and their future cash flow simply by cracking open their project backlog. Now, to make these predictions, we're definitely not just guessing. We rely heavily on the SASB standards. If you're familiar with them, you know this is a rigorous, globally recognized framework that's now under the stewardship of the International Sustainability Standards Board. Global investors use these exact guidelines to pinpoint the sustainability risks and opportunities that legitimately affect a company's cash flows and cost of capital. For our purposes today, we'll be zeroing in on their specific metrics for the engineering and construction services sector. Here's a quick roadmap for our explainer today. First, we'll look at the construction crystal ball. Second, defining climate risk. Third, hydrocarbons versus renewables. Fourth, the risk of cancellations. Fifth, mitigation beyond energy. And we'll wrap it all up with reading the climate scorecard.
Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, the construction crystal ball.
You know, the engineering and construction industry is incredibly unique. What these firms are contracted to build today literally locks in our environmental footprint for decades to come. So, to evaluate this future impact, investors look straight at the backlog. According to the standard, backlog is simply the monetary value of projects that aren't completed as of the close of the reporting period. Basically, it's revenue that is contractually expected in the future but hasn't been recognized on the balance sheet just yet. For an investor, it is the ultimate financial pipeline.
Moving right along to Section 2, defining climate risk.
These construction firms are facing a huge core tension right now, mainly because their clients are trying to navigate incredibly disruptive climate regulations. Builders of massive fossil fuel infrastructure find themselves fully exposed to secondary risks. The standard actually summarizes this perfectly, warning that downside risks may manifest through project delays, cancellations, and diminished long-term revenue growth opportunities. Think about it. If the clients are facing regulatory pressure, the construction firm's own future growth is suddenly in real financial peril. Which brings us to Section 3, hydrocarbons versus renewables. To actually measure this peril we just talked about, investors have to weigh the old world against the new world by comparing the monetary value of different project types. The standard cleanly divides these projects into two camps. On one side, you have hydrocarbon-related projects. That's anything tied to extraction, refining, or fossil fuel-based electricity generation, so your oil, gas, and coal. Then on the other side, you've got renewable energy projects. These are sources replenished faster than they're depleted, things like geothermal, wind, solar, hydro, and biomass.
Let's ground this with a hypothetical firm's backlog. Imagine an investor opens up a report and sees a breakdown like this: 80% hydrocarbon, 15% renewable, and 5% other. Well, they instantly spot a highly vulnerable business mix. A massive chunk of this company's future expected revenue is heavily tied to carbon-intensive industries. If regulations shift aggressively, that 80% suddenly represents a monumental financial liability. Conversely, a firm that flips that ratio and specializes in renewable infrastructure could possess a massive competitive advantage going forward.
Now for Section 4, the risk of cancellations. Because let's be honest, having a multi-billion-dollar pipeline is completely useless if those projects are abandoned before you can recognize a single dime of revenue. And that brings us to metric 410B.2, which tracks backlog cancellations specifically associated with hydrocarbon projects. This looks at backlog that was reduced or terminated because, say, a client couldn't get their permits, they lost financing, or they just voluntarily pulled the plug. Tracking the specific monetary value of these cancellations is huge. It reveals if those theoretical regulatory risks we mentioned are actually materializing into real lost dollars today.
That takes us to Section 5, mitigation beyond energy.
We have to remember that mitigating climate change isn't just about replacing a coal plant with a solar farm. There's a whole other category here. Metric 410B.3 specifically tracks the backlog for non-energy projects associated with climate change mitigation. We're talking about huge infrastructure plays, mass transportation systems, low-carbon transit, carbon capture, energy efficiency retrocommissioning, and even the decommissioning of old hydrocarbon projects. This metric shows investors the massive upside potential and revenue available for firms that are actively executing green infrastructure outside of just power generation.
Finally, Section 6, reading the climate scorecard. So let's bring all these metrics together to show how an investor actually applies this knowledge in the real world. Think of this matrix as a concrete scorecard for climate resilience. Under metric 410B1, a high hydrocarbon backlog is a glaring risk indicator, while a high renewables backlog signals clear opportunity. Then you have metric 410B2, acting as the alarm bell. Rising hydrocarbon cancellations mean the risk is already costing the firm money right now. And finally, 410B3 highlights all those lucrative non-energy mitigation opportunities. Balancing these data points is what transforms abstract environmental concepts into hard, actionable financial data.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. The next time you evaluate an engineering and construction firm, don't just look at what they finished building last year. Look at their backlog through this exact lens. When you look at a company's pipeline, are they building the past or are they constructing the future? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep looking closely at the data.